Welcome to this special episode of the Deadly Force Incident Study. Today I have a special guest, Chinn, my dad. He is the one that began this study in 1999. And today he's joining me so that we can do a deep dive into credible threat arrests. We're going to talk about why they're important first and then where exactly we draw the line. So we're going to be diving into some of the mass murder study, and then we're going to talk about those credible threat arrests that did not result in a mass murder thanks to intervention. So can you kick this off with just telling us a little bit about the beginnings of the Deadly Force Incident Study and why you chose to draw the line where you do with the credible threat arrests?
Certainly, I'd be glad to. And there is a video we have made that talks just about the history of the DFI study. And you can see that link up here in the corner and click on it when you want. And it'll take you into more of the complete history of the deadly force incident study, how it came to the name, some of the early cases, and things that resulted in the deadly force incident study being the most recognized study of the worst level of violence at faith-based organizations in the U.S. We, as the data keepers of the deadly force study, have to go in and look at that incident and look at that arrest and the court documents and the findings of a jury or a judge and determine, does that really meet the threshold? And sometimes it involves a discussion with two or more, sometimes all 9 people that are in that committee that evaluates deadly force incidents. We want to get as many of those caught as we can. That's all left of bang stuff, and we want to see more intervention happen. But and so we want to track these things, but we got to have a threshold that we look at that keeps us on track.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about this mass murder study before we get into deciding between some of those that are on the line, just to show the leakage, the warning signs leading up to these events, and the similarity between that and these credible threat arrests. But these are interesting statistics. This is from the mass murder study that started in 1963, Birmingham, Alabama, the first mass murder at a faith-based organization in the U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
In this data, the biggest attack trigger is bias when it comes to mass murder.
No question.
Our overall study, what's the number of bias motivated attacks in that one?
Less than 5% in overall.
Yeah.
But when we're looking at mass murders, it's the number one reason for a mass murder event taking place.
And that's because of the planning that is put into it, and that can work to our advantage. Those things can be thwarted when they're recognized and dealt with properly. So
that's so correct.
What we're going to look at now is some of the stories that were no intervention took place. So these are the ones that wound up in the DFI, the mass murder study. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Birmingham, Alabama. And will you go into that a little bit, some of the warning signs that we saw prior to that attack?
Sure. Birmingham was under such brutal conflict in the early 60s and had resulted in so many bombings that it had earned the nickname of Bombingham. There was a lot of hatred going on. There was a lot of tension between black and white. And those things were etched into my mind as a young man. I can remember being at my aunt and uncle's house on the floor watching news reports and seeing this black boy who was about my own age laying on a driveway that was angled and blood pouring out from him, trickling down the driveway. And I was just so confused at what was going on in Birmingham. And it seemed like a very hostile place to me. And I don't even know if that particular um, video happened in Birmingham or not, but Birmingham was well known to be the racial epicenter of conflict. Not only was Birmingham itself as a city an epicenter, but the 16th Street Baptist Church was the point where many of these discussions were taking place by black leaders of the time. Martin Luther King Jr. had been there, Fred Shuttlesworth had been there. Jesse Jackson was a very young man at the time, but he had been there. Other black leaders had spoken at 16th Street Baptist Church. So nowadays we would ask ourselves, why did you not have a security presence? Four men pulled up in a Chevrolet, got out, placed 19 sticks of dynamite and a timer under a side stairwell. And I've been there several times and walked the site. And when we talk about having somebody on the outside watching what's happening on the outside, that's just one level of security. They had nothing going on for security. They were upset that so many had threatened lives around them, but they weren't taking any steps towards keeping their people safe. And even after the bombing, it was a focus on the racial divides at the time, which I'm glad for. I'm glad that that we changed the way in America that we dealt with our black brothers and sisters. You know, Shanna, this is totally off the topic for today, but one thing that always bothered me about Birmingham, part of the reason there was such a delay on ambulance service getting to the church is because they had to put together a black ambulance team, because white ambulance teams in those days wouldn't work on a black victim. I mean, and when I hear people say that we haven't learned anything since the racial tension of the 60s, that's just nonsense. We've come a long way. But my point is, they should have also paid some attention to, should we have security? And the answer to that is an overwhelming yes. They should have. And they, as far as I know, never put together any kind of a security program. They have one now down there. At least they have some people who question you when you walk in and want to know why you're there. Glad you're there, but kind of want to know why. And so I assume those are part of a security program. But my point is, there was beyond leakage. It was beyond leakage. It was front page news every week that some black pastor's home or church had been bombed. Many of them. I mean, where was the wake up call that we need to have eyes on the outside and ready for an attack? It didn't exist. And that's one of the things that we hope to get from these studies of the mass murders and the others is a way to signal when something's about to happen and do something about it. And I think the ones we're going to talk about today are examples of when a signal was caught.
Yeah. And in their defense, this was the first mass murder at a faith-based organization. So I think it caught them off guard, it being the first
Oh,
really
it did.
horrific mass murder at a faith-based organization.
Yeah.
So, and it was not only the political climate at the time and what that church was standing for civil rights, but it was also friends and family of the individuals. There's a niece of one of these guys. Her uncle told her, just wait until Sunday morning and they'll beg us to let them segregate. And then there was also a call into the Sunday school secretary saying 3 minutes just before the bombing happened. So
that's all the caller said, 3 minutes.
And we're encouraged often, and it's good to believe people when they say things, believe the threats. So take them seriously. In 2007, things take a turn. This is another mass murder bias incident, and this one you are very close to. December 9th, 2007. You were in the hallway of the church that day. So this is in Nevada and Colorado Springs, YWAM, and New Life Church. A man killed 4, both of those. And I believe this is the first mass murder at a church where the leakage came through social media. That's the chain.
That is correct. That is correct. This was there were a couple of other mass murders by people who despised Christians in between Wedgwood Baptist and New Life. There was the situation in Sash, Texas, where a neighbor despised Christians and had it with them and got angry and walked across the road and shot the pastor and a deacon, killing both of them, and then turned his firearm towards a couple of innocent ladies parked at a stop sign nearby and killed them. They were pulling a horse trailer and something was wrong with their trailer and they'd gotten out and were looking at their trailer and he just killed them. And his motivation was bias towards Christians, and he had leaked severely. They had been dealing with this guy for a while. He was a problem to the church. He protested anytime they were pulling in and out of the church. He thought they were doing too much on his road. They knew that he didn't like them. And there again, just like Birmingham, did not have any kind of a security program set up. And they knew they had a neighbor that despised them being there. But yes, the New Life Church and YWAM incident that I was directly involved in was the first time we saw something happen on social media that in hindsight would have done us really good to watch it. Now, there were a lot of firsts involved in that. We were the very first church that had a distinct, organized defenders group. We were the life safety ministry. We were defined as the security operators for the church. It was the very first time that an attack had happened at a church that had very specific security operators who stopped the attack after people were killed. Now, I've found some other incidents before that where attackers were stopped before they could kill, and we'll do another whole series on that someday. But yes, this was the first time that an attacker was killed after he had killed others. And more to your point, it was the first time that that attacker had posted on the internet. And I have many pages. I was able to get on the internet the day after and start searching, and I found several of the posts that he had made and was able to capture them before somebody in law enforcement took them off. And I've got several pages of his post going clear back to, as I recall, 2002. Uh, and he had mentioned New Life Church several times in that time period. He had mentioned YWAM several times in that time period. And what was interesting is you could watch his character uh, uh, degrade, I think would be the right word, from 2003 to 2007 when he finally pulled the trigger and decided that was the day. And there was something else unique about that. It was also a copycat killing because the Omaha Mall killer had attacked the Van Moor Mall in Omaha, Nebraska on Wednesday before our killer attacked on Sunday. And when you read through his years of postings, he, in the last year of his postings, he started using the term um, to describe himself as one of the nobodies. Now there's some flags that parents and family members and friends of somebody who doesn't seem to have a good grip on life's perspectives, when they start considering themselves a nobody and they're kind of like Eeyore the donkey, nobody loves me, everybody hates me. I mean, every kid goes through a little bit of that, but this guy was over the top. And when the attack happened at the Omaha Mall, he wrote on some of those websites that I captured his writings on. He wrote, "Well, it looks like one of the nobodies just became somebody, and he left a world that doesn't give a blank about him, but now everybody knows him." And that's another thing these guys do. They want to get their name out there. We used to think they feared only dying, and now we know they don't even fear dying. They just fear uh, failure. They want to get a body count. That's what they're after, is to get a body count. And the more we can learn from these that we missed on and start turning them into credible threats that were interrupted, the better off we're going to be.
Absolutely. You brought up two really good points that I want to talk about a little bit more. The first one is the copycat. That's a trend that we see in all of these. The credible threat arrests, the mass murders. These guys get obsessed with prior mass killers, and either one of them or a whole bunch of them. And family, friends, they see this obsession taking place. So, and then the planning, the years of planning. You said that his leakage, you found the earliest ones in like 2002. Um,
2002 or three is. I haven't looked at those documents in a while. I need to go back and relook at them. But it was two or three.
that's a lot of years, and we see
You
that
bet.
in these mass murders, the years of planning and journaling and just uh, that leakage that comes out in social media and to friends and family. The FBI conducted a really in-depth study on the pre-attack behaviors of active shooters, and they said that there are most often about 4 or 5 behaviors displayed that others see. Others meaning social media, family, friends, coworkers. 4 to 5 behaviors displayed before anything happens. So
Hmm.
it's hit or miss whether those get reported or not.
Yeah.
So knowing,
And a family member, a mother, sometimes a dad, but especially a mom, and we have so many situations in America where the dad isn't even in the picture. He's gone. Uh, and it leaves the mother as the only one that's raising those children. And a mother has a very special bond to her child. It's extremely tough for a mother to pick up the phone and call law enforcement and say, I'm seeing some actions and attitudes in my son that are concerning me, and what do I do about it? That's very, very hard for a mother to do. Uh, so it's not very common that the parent, a single parent of somebody that's starting to drift over the cliff, calls in with an early warning. We need we need more people to see what's happening and call it in, and that's difficult for family members to do. It's difficult for friends to do. I mean, we've all grown up with friends that were, said stupid things, and if we were to say, if we were to have kept track of those things, somebody would say, why would you not call authorities and let them know that? Uh, I've heard friends say dumb things, but when somebody's whole attitude is starting to really go over the ledge, somebody needs to make a call.
yeah, that call is a hard one to make. But if you know the people in your church and you have good relationships, you're going to hear some of that from those inside it your church anyways, so you can
Well,
be
that's assuming that the attacker is in your church.
right.
And very seldom on these mass murders was that the case. Sometimes, some of these mass murders, Brookfield, Wisconsin being an example, uh, sometimes they are in the church, but often the church knows nothing about that individual until they strike.
And that's the one that we're going to get into next. But like Covenant, that shooting, the Annunciation, that didn't rise to a mass murder by the grace of God because the guy shot
Yeah.
29 people. But um, there were there are some connections to those at times. But this next one,
Yeah.
August 5th, 2012. This is in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and this guy had no connection. He didn't even have a clue on what these people actually believed. This was the Sikh temple, and this is one that
Hmm.
I just visited when we were at a conference there in Racine, Wisconsin last year. So, do
Hmm.
you want to go into that a little bit? We got to hear directly from Sam Linda, the officer that stopped this killer. Go ahead.
Yeah, and this that when you and I were there just a year ago, that was actually the second time I'd been there. I went not long after the incident and was guided through the entire temple with the new temple president. And he showed me exactly where the attacker had killed people. And I wanted to see the closet where many had hid. And I just can't imagine the horror of them hiding in that little closet in the back of the kitchen and hearing him walk around and shoot people and hearing the gunshots and trying to not breathe or gasp. And finally, when law enforcement arrived, he went outside, and that's when he began shooting at police officers and was put down by Sam Linda. But this guy had gotten a dishonorable discharge out of the military. He was well known to be a white supremacist. He tapped into his big thing was white supremacy music. He was a real music buff and just tapped into all kinds of weird stuff, which our killer did too at New Life. That was one of the common threads between the two. But this guy, it was even a case of mistaken identity. He despised Muslims and he thought he was attacking a Muslim temple, going on nothing but the shape of the dome and the look of it and the clothes that people wore going in and out of it. It looked Muslim to him, so uh, he decided it was a Muslim temple, and that's what made him choose the Sikh temple there in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. But there were definitely people, even on an official role, who knew that this guy was not one of society's best. Um, and and as he got worse, I don't know if there was anybody close enough to him to see how he was deteriorating and report it, but there must have been somebody.
Yeah,
Surely somebody knew he was going off the deep end and did not report it.
that's another big warning sign is when people become isolated. So it's
Mhm.
hard to know what's going on when they
Yeah,
push everybody else out. But it's not a healthy thing, and we see that as a common trend in these killers
yeah.
as well. So it is.
That's what Ted Kaczynski did. You know, the Unabomber. He isolated himself to a cabin. I believe it was in Montana. Cut off all ties with family, and in his case, it was a brother that finally called law enforcement and said, "Look, I, I'm sorry. I think you need to look at my brother for these bombings." And man, was he on. He was right on.
So our next one, talking about leakage, talking about mass murder, December 17th, 2015. This is Charleston, South Carolina. This is a well-known mass murder attack. Emmanuel AME Church. A man killed 9 in this church, and there was leakage displayed on social media for him as well. He had an obsession with white supremacy ideology. He displayed and posted on social media symbols and flags of these groups. And then he had lengthy rants on social media using with his username Little Aryan. So there were lots of signs his friends and family knew that he had become radicalized in this white supremacy ideology.
You know, that's another site I've walked. I try to walk all the sites of the mass murders, and I've walked most of them, and that was a very memorable site visit for me. Um, Going into the lower level where he killed all the people in that after service prayer time, which it was just the leaders of the church that gathered to have an after service prayer time and just walked right into it. They they knew that something wasn't right. Uh, one of those killed, Tawanza Sanders, actually took a photograph of him with his cell phone uh, just because he thought there's something not right here. Um, there were there were people all around that guy who had to have seen those posts that you've just mentioned and had to have recognized that something had changed in his demeanor because he hadn't been a racist all his life. This was a relatively new turn he had taken. He had been radicalized by white supremacy a year, 18 months before the attack, something like that. His whole social media started to change during that time. And that's another indicator, and I think you mentioned it a while ago. When you see somebody who goes through a significant uh, uh, identity change, and a lot of times people have talked on the backside of those that their change just blindsided them. They didn't see this coming. How did he get so radicalized? Man, when you see that in somebody, it's time to let somebody in law enforcement know, which is another reason we encourage churches to have a relationship with people in law enforcement before you have an incident. You want to know who you can talk to about what.
I want to take a little sidetrack here because I heard you bring up Taiwanza Sanders, and this is a pretty dark episode. Just a lot of garbage in this one, and
Mm-hmm.
I love some of your stories that you have shared about Taiwanza, and I had no idea that he took a picture of the killer. I know you
Mm-hmm.
described before that there's and you're doing episodes right now on choosing the right people for your church security team, but you
Mm-hmm.
talked about Taiwanza Sanders being one of those that clearly had protection in his DNA. I thought it was super interesting that he did take that.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about him just so we have a good story to add to this episode?
No, it's a heart wrenching story. He sat there and watched this killer pull out a 45 ACP and stick it to the head of his senior pastor, Pastor Pinkney, and pull the trigger. So Tawanza had just seen up close and personal what a 45 does to a man's head at point blank range. And then he was sitting there watching this killer go around the table, executing people one after another, after another, after another. The killer eventually shot 88 times inside the church. Most of those projectiles went into a body because he was shooting at very close range, execution style. So Tawanza was, I believe he was 21 years old at the time. No, 26 or 7. Uh, and he's watching this, and then he could see that the man was moving closer to his 87-year-old Aunt Susie and Susie Jackson. And Taiwanza stood up and got between the killer and his 87-year-old aunt and put out his hands and was shielding his Aunt Susie. And he engaged the killer by talking. He said, "Why are you doing this? You don't have to do this." And put his body between that 45 and his aunt. And that is when the killer said all the putrid things he said about black people, and I'm not even going to repeat them. But you can do media searches and find out what he said. It was just vile spilling out of his mouth. And then he shot Tawanza, and Tawanza went down, and then he shot his 87-year-old Aunt Susie, and she went down. The reason we know how what Tawanza said, what the killer said back to him, and how Tawanza was shot and Susie was shot right after him. The reason we know all that is because Tawanza's own mother, Felicia Sanders, was laying on the ground protecting her grandchild who was under her. And she was pretending to be dead, knowing that the killer probably hadn't kept track of who he'd killed and who he hadn't. So she was laying on the floor, and her intentions were accurate. He never shot her. Uh, but she saw Tawanza go down. She saw 87-year-old Aunt Susie go down. And she told later that as Susie was dying, Tawanza was stroking her hand, comforting her as he was dying. And I've used that example with people before, because here was a young man who had the mental capacity to be a protector. He was exactly the type of mentality that every church security director needs to be looking for in his people. He needs to be looking for people like Tawanza Sanders, who can look a 45 in the end of the barrel and place their life between somebody they love. And we teach that you've got to be ready, willing, and able. Tawanza was ready. He was there. He was there physically. He was willing, obviously. He placed himself there. He wasn't able. Able means you're trained and equipped. Tawanza had no training. He had no equipment. But he was there and he was willing. And I have often used his story to talk to church security audiences and say that's the type of person you need to find in your congregation.
Thank you for sharing that and for going off on this sidetrack. We spend so much time talking about these monsters. It's really good to hear somebody of such strong character. We were talking about the Charleston killer, and just to contrast the direct opposite of what Tawanza was. This guy continues throughout his trial to journal about being bummed that he can't go to the movies or eat good food, but he still felt like his killing was worth it because of what he perceived wrongs perpetrated by the Black community. There's just no remorse.
But I'm convinced he's probably very engaged in white supremacy right there in the prison.
Yeah, it's a breeding ground for that anyway. So 3 years later, we have October 27th, 2018. This is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This one is just horrific.
Tree of life.
Mm-hmm. Man killed 11 in the synagogue. This was a 46-year-old male. He was active on the social media site Gab. Gab is not as regulated as like Facebook or Twitter. So there's some white supremacist groups and neo-Nazi groups that can really go off on that site. And so very active on that site. And he echoed in his posting some of the Emmanuel AME church shooter. So that one where we did see the leakage. He had posted something just before he went to shoot up that church, but that one.
And why people who saw those posts never called is beyond me. At least with our killer at New Life in 2007, many, as I understand, of the people on the websites where he was posting were already calling law enforcement. They already had a good idea of who they were looking for before our killing started at New Life. He had killed at YWAM at 12:30 a.m., a little off, maybe 12:28. and he didn't strike at New Life until about 1:10 p.m. So it was a little over 13 hours later when he struck at New Life, a little over 12 hours later. Uh, and several people had already been calling with his name. And what's interesting is the investigators had showed his picture even to the survivors at the YWAM camp, and they said, no, that's not him.
That is
But it's interesting that people were starting to call that day. But they were calling after he'd killed at YWAM. It was in between the two he killed at YWAM and the two he killed at New Life where the calls started coming in. But of course, they didn't know where he was going next.
And the one that attacked our church there at New Life, he did have some ties to New Life. In fact, at an event, there was some leadership that had made some comments to his mom about
Yes.
possibly carrying out violence.
They felt like the Lord had spoke to him and told them that her son had violence in his heart. And she went home, and in his own writings, he said that she destroyed over $900 worth of his video games and CDs. And that, of course, increased his hatred at his parents and New Life. But yeah, he had been there. He knew the layout. At least he'd been there at least once.
Yeah. I don't want to get into another sidetrack, but the video games, that's another trend throughout these.
I would encourage anybody to read Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman's book entitled Assassination Generation, where he really looks at violent video games.
We have our next one is here close to me. It was March 27th, 2023. This is Covenant Presbyterian Church and Private School. This is a female. She came in, so it's different, but this was a transgender female, so that she'd been through some identity crisis stuff, and she killed 3 little kids, 3 staff members. She was 28 years old. When we talk about planning, I think Mike Colazzo is the one that had said that she had been planning a mass shooting for 10 years. So
yeah.
There were warning signs. I have not seen any social media that she did. I've heard different reports on this, but we do have a ton of journal entries of hers where she has detailed plans. She has school schedules, school breaks, staff, how many male staff members, female staff members. She chose this elementary school because she had first thought about high schoolers. She was afraid that they would be able to tackle her and stop her. So she was looking for big numbers. Her hatred seemed to be on Christians, and the ideology of white privilege was in a lot of her rants that she journaled about. So her leakage came very much inside of her home, where she kept all of these journals. And I'm sure that she had to have said things to people around her as well. But she was obviously in crisis.
Yeah, white privilege and the whole gay rights stuff. I mean, she was transgender. She was into the LGBT, and just wanted to lash out at anybody who taught anything different.
This kind of reminds me of the political climate that we talked about in Birmingham, of, you know, so much
Yes.
tension over this. And when we had one just 2 years later, this is not
Yep.
a murder, like we said before, by the grace of God, because this is another transgender having some identity crisis 23-year-old man that came and attacked Annunciation Catholic School while they
Yep.
were in mass.
Yeah.
Killed
While
two.
they were praying.
Yeah. So, and he had Leakage, the same sort of ideology there, but
Mm-hmm.
another one in 2025. This one did result in a mass murder. This was new in the weapons used, because he used so many. This is the guy that rammed his truck into the LDS church on September 28th, 2025 in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
He set it on fire and shot people. So
Right.
he killed 4 and injured 9 others. So, but his leakage, he had persistent grievances against the LDS church, which he expressed to those around him. So we don't have
Mm-hmm.
the full reports on him yet. That's still
Mm-hmm.
at this time, but it looks like there were plenty of warning signs, and we know that his motivation was anti-religious ideology. So
Yeah. And you bring up a good point there, and that's the freshest mass murder at a faith-based organization. And your point was there's a lot we still don't know about that situation, even though it happened several months ago now. But and this is kind of a transition into the topic that is the main topic of this discussion today. How do we determine what goes into a deadly force study? The FBSN doesn't try to be the one bringing breaking news. We stay out of that circle. There's plenty of folks out there doing breaking news. That's not where we operate. We try to let things settle out, even if we can, until the trial has taken place, if there's a trial for the killer or the aggressor. And some of those that we're going to be talking about today, I think you're going back into 2022, things that have happened since then, and maybe even further back than that. But that's one of the things that makes our study unique. Is we want the data that we share with people to be fact based, meaningful. When we say that 77% of the attacks either start or happen in their entirety outside the building, that's a very carefully arrived at figure. We don't start entering the data till at least a year after the incident has happened. Um, uh, we we want to make sure that we know everything about that incident that we can know, and always have a certain amount. I can think of 2 requests for information that I've sent to court systems in the last month, where I'm needing more information on a court case. We want that data to be truly meaningful. So with that, maybe we can transition into some of those that we're currently looking at.
yeah, these are some that are on the line of what we include and what we don't include. And this only pertains to credible threat arrests. We're going to dive into a wider range of what's included and what's not included in a later episode with members of the team that analyze these stories. So I'm excited about doing that. Please go ahead and subscribe, like this video, so that you get notified whenever we release that. It should be sometime next week. So go ahead and subscribe so you get those notifications. But let's look at today just the credible threat arrests, some of these that are on the line, what we include and what we do not include. So starting with November of 2022, and I brought this up in 2022 because we are finalizing our 2022 study. It has not been published yet, but we've gone through the whole thing. So I have been working pretty nonstop in 2022, and I've seen a lot of credible threat arrests. That means there's a lot of people out there planning evil, but there are also a lot of good law enforcement, FBI, working to thwart these attacks. So there are several in 2022 that were arrested, and then in 2022 there were some sentences carried out from 2019 incidences that were stopped in 2019. So we're going to talk about those today and what's included and what's not. So this one in New York City, this is a 21 and 22-year-old. They were arrested after a tip from the UJA, Federation of New York. This federation had created a community security initiative after the deadly attack on the Tree of Life synagogue. So well done.
Basically, they had created a coalition.
Yeah. Well done on their part. A lot you get heat a lot of times for closing the gate after the horses get out. But this is an example of, they learned from something horrific and they're preventing it now, which is the same thing that our DFI study does. So that's right. Why I love it. But they had discovered some threatening tweets to shoot up a synagogue and die. The two were arrested on weapons charges at Penn Station. This was a viable threat. They had posted it out. They had made plans together. At the apartment, law enforcement found, it was at one of the attackers, a Glock in one of the attackers' backpacks. So that's kind of where these reports stopped. The two were arrested, like I said, on weapons charges. This one we did not include. There just wasn't enough to put it into the deadly force incident study. There was enough that these guys needed to go away. They needed to have their plan stopped as they were making them, but it did not rise to the level of deadly force incident for purposes of our study. One of the things that we look at is, did they have a plan? Did they have a target? And did they have means to carry out that plan? So here, they didn't have a clear target. It was just a synagogue in New York City. And the means, finding a Glock in a backpack. That,
if police raided my office today, they would find a handgun in my backpack, another one under the table on a magnet, and another one in my car. And in New York City, that would make front page news.
Yeah. I think a lot of our viewers probably could be found with very similar things. So, serious.
But this brings this incident, even though I agree it does not rise to the level of being included in the deadly force incident study. There's a couple of things about this that are interesting trends in this great endeavor of protecting our faith-based organizations. For one thing, the year 2022 is significant in the study because it was the first year that churches all across the United States were all coming back together after 2 years of COVID fears. And 2020 and 2021, the data is different than the years before and the years after. And in 2022, we're definitely seeing an increase over 2020 and 2021 because more people were back to church. The other thing that's interesting about this is New York City is not the best place for having intervention capable defenders. It's just there is a uh, and I want to be careful how I say that. What I mean is there's a district attorney there and prosecutors who are not sympathetic to the cause of self defense. And that's why they jump on something like somebody having a 45 in their backpack. That's a, oh my God type reaction in New York City and in other places along the East Coast. They just can't imagine how somebody would carry a firearm in their backpack.
Yeah, yeah. And you said about 2022 being unique because it's coming out of COVID. Even in the beginning of 2022, we're still reporting on stories, churches that were still shut down from COVID in 2020. But not only will it be more deadly than 2020 and 2021, right now it is looking like it is going to be the second deadliest year overall in our study. 2017
Wow.
and I don't have confirmation on it yet, but it's looking like it will be number two, unfortunately. And we hope in the coming years, as this awareness is reached by more and more churches, that will trend down. But those plotting evil, it's not trending down. Intervention is going up, but those plotting evil seems to be going up as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, there's no shortage of criminal mentality. But
let's
I agree that one doesn't reach the threshold. What's the next one?
It is, we're going to go back to June of 2019. This is a bomb plot at a church, a Nigerian church, from a 22-year-old Syrian refugee. The Pittsburgh Joint Terrorism Task Force intervened and thwarted the attack. He was targeting a specific church, the Legacy International Worship Center, when investigators caught wind of his ISIS-related ties. He was an ISIS supporter. They masqueraded as support to him, and he provided them with instructional documents to construct explosives. He purchased nails and acetone to assemble a destructive device that he planned to detonate near the church to kill congregants. He shared detailed maps with handwritten markings that identified the church. It identified routes into the church and escape routes. He had a 10-point written plan of attack written out in great detail, much like the Covenant shooters' details. So there was plenty there to include this one. We have the plan. He's got the means, even though some of it was fake from investigators, and he had the target picked out. So
Yeah, I'm remembering this one now, and that one, uh, the decision was made to put it into the study, wasn't it?
absolutely, yeah, that one
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, he had absolute plans. He had it very well laid out. He was instructing the FBI undercover guy, which he didn't know was an FBI undercover, but he was instructing him on how to build. This is not an example of somebody that didn't know what he was doing. You know, we talk often about the triple jeopardy. You have to have the intention, the capacity, and the opportunity to commit mass murder or any crime for that matter. And this guy was bringing all three of those together. And he had already, like you said, he'd even identified the specific congregation where he was going to attack.
yeah, his opportunity was just taken from him. Thank goodness. So,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to June 2022. This is a plot to attack synagogues and create a white ethno state. So, this is a 25-year-old. He started a white supremacy group called Rape Krieg, where he planned to create his white ethno state by an accelerated means, targeting Jews for murder and white women for rape to reproduce and make a bunch of white babies. So they got the attention of the FBI. They had actually started, he was also a Marine that had been dishonorably discharged for his extremist activity. So he was watched. And in 2017, this is before he was discharged, is probably what got their attention. But they were training. They had weapons. They would do drills. They would shoot together. So it was not just him. He had a group of people that thought this was a great idea. So they planned to bomb synagogues, and then they talked about, well, maybe, no, they planned to shoot up the synagogue, and then they talked about, no, let's maybe just set it on fire. So they didn't have a clear plan of attack. They didn't have a specific target. He was arrested on weapons violations as well and some others, but the group fell apart, thankfully, after that. But this did not rise to the level of being included in the DFI study.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I'm remembering now that somewhere I've got the court judgment on this guy, and he was arrested on three counts. Like you said, two of them had to do with making false claims on obtaining a firearm. Third one had to do with terrorism. He was only found guilty on the first two, and his sentence was time served. He had been in jail from the time he was arrested to the time of his trial later, and his sentence was time served, and then he was let loose with a tracking device and supervised probation for a period of 3 years or something. As you know, and I think his sentence was too light, uh, but he could have been sentenced for 5 years or more and still not made the level of a deadly force incident. So I'm assuming, I think I heard you correct, that this one was not put into the DFI study.
That's right. We left this one out. It's still important
He
to,
was an idiot. He's an idiot with a capital I.
but he
I
got
mean,
people invested in it with him. How,
yeah,
which blows
yeah,
my mind. How,
right.
who thinks this is a great idea?
A friend of mine in the FBI says you cannot argue with a flat earther. And this guy, there's no reason in people like this. And how he can attract a following, like you said, is just, it makes me scratch my head. Are there really that many flat earthers out there? I guess so.
This goes a step quite a bit further than the flat earthers, though. So, um,
Well, it's just a remark about the idiocy of some of our population. There's just no way I can candy coat that. We've got some real idiots out there.
let's go on to the next one. This one you know well. This is November 2019. You were still in Colorado at the time. This is a
Oh yeah,
bomb plot at a Pueblo synagogue. A 28-year-old neo-Nazi. I think it was the Temple Emmanuel. Is that
that
correct?
sounds right. That sounds right. I've walked it. I've been there with the temple president, um, and this particular guy had very detailed plans. Um, his triple jeopardy was coming together, and one of the things that struck me so much about this guy, if and this is often the case, if something had happened to the FBI undercover man that was working with him, if something had happened to him and he'd been taken out of the picture, this guy was going to find a way to strike. He was absolutely determined. He wanted, whether it was explosives or poisoning the water supply, whatever it would be, he wanted to see members of the Jewish population die in Pueblo, Colorado. He was absolutely uh, determined to make that happen. So I'm fairly confident this one did make it into the study. If it didn't, we need to have more discussion on it because I've been there and walked it with the temple president, and this one left no doubt in my mind that this guy was going to do it. He just hooked his wagon to the wrong person.
Yeah, this one it was included, and it's one that we use as an example when we're presenting credible threat arrests. I mean, the guy he drove the fabricated bomb to the temple. He was
You
arrested
know,
there.
it's interesting. One of the side notes on this, and it's probably more interesting to you and me than it is the rest of our viewers. But
If they stay
when I
point in the video, they're interested. So thank you.
well, it was just a added personal thing to me that in my discussions with him, and I was actually called by the FBI to go down and meet with him. They wanted me to give him some pointers on things to look for. But in my discussions with him, and by the way, I'd met him about 4 years before too, so we kind of knew each other already. But in my discussions with the temple president, discovered that our dads, my dad and his dad, were both on the USS Princeton when it was sunk in World War II on October 24th, 1944. So that kind of made a brotherly connection between me and the temple president. But it also just really resonated to me that here's this white supremacy guy who despises his Jewish neighbors, who doesn't even realize that the temple president's dad fought in World War II for the United States. I
Wow.
mean, it just struck me that these people that strike out at our Jewish neighbors have no. It's just putrid the way they view them, whether it's Jewish or black or whoever. I don't understand how somebody can get such hatred for a group of people and not even know what the background is of that family.
They've got to dehumanize them, and they
Yeah,
find people with that ideology online so much of the time, and it feeds into that. So
yeah, yeah,
we want to catch those. We want to prevent this in the future. So this is a
yeah.
very important piece to our study.
Well, I want to say before we end this, my sincere thanks to everybody who now serves on this committee that looks over these incidents. Now there's 9 people in that committee, a total of 9, counting myself, and it's just such a blessing that we've had help step forward and say we want to help uh, do this study and continue it because it's a very important study to continue. It put the topic on the table for churches across the U.S. to study. When they hear that there's been 2,538 deadly force incidents in 23 years associated with faith based organizations in the United States, that's why we do it, is to get that talking point out there. Um, and I'm just so thankful and grateful to everybody who works on this study. And that includes you, Shanna. You do a tremendous job with this. You picked up the leadership baton on this, and you're doing a fantastic job. So thank you. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to having um, one of these episodes with the other analysts on. They do it as volunteers. Their heart is in it. The only benefit they get from it is the benefit of the churches using that study. So
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
good, great group of guys.